Okay, so here we are. This is video number 2, and we're calling it the tube, the tongue, and the tall neck. And these are both 3 specific things and also 3 concepts that I'm going to use to hopefully um, accomplish my goal, which is to take something that can be really complicated, this singing thing that we do, and boil it down to a handful of basic principles. I'm going to explain each one of them, to the tube, the tongue, and the tall neck, and hopefully connect them together for you. And then the next few videos will build on these kind of base principles. Heads up, there's a little bit of science. Hang in there with me. I promise it's there to make this more simple and not less. So you already watched one video, and that's a video I did for my own students a few weeks ago, where I talked about breathing and how to make sure that you're taking the energized breath that you want to take and what you should see or feel rather and hear. And in that video, I referenced the idea of the voice as a wind instrument that has a tube. That's going to be an integral part of what we're going to talk about. So I need you to own the idea that you, as a singer, have a tube. And that tube is your responsibility, and you're in charge of it and in control of it. And everything you're working to learn about singing is giving you tools to that end. That's the whole goal. So speaking of scientific simplification of something, this whole vocal thing that we do at the very base level, whether you're singing or speaking or yelling, if you take a second and think right now about your favorite singer ever and the most impressive or emotional thing you ever heard them sing, right? Regardless of what it was or how impressive it was, at the base level, it's just air going through a tube. That's the whole thing. We spend years and a lot of money learning how to do this, but at the base level, it's just air moving through a tube. And your whole job as the singer is to keep the air moving through the tube. To that end, to simplify this down even further and get closer to what you're thinking about in your own singing land, everything you run into in a vocal situation, so whether you're in your choral rehearsal or you're in your voice lesson or you're in the practice room or you're in the car, wherever it is you're singing, when something pops up that you might consider to be a vocal issue or a problem or something you want to change in some capacity, any of those things are going to be, at the base level, either a problem with the tube or a problem with the air going through the tube or a combination of the two. I mean everything. Intonation problems. If a note is pushing sharp or flat, it's a problem with the tube or a problem with the air in the tube or both. If there's too much vibrato, not enough vibrato, the vibrato's too fast, it's too slow, it's too wide, your high note didn't come out, your low notes are getting stuck, it's really exhausting and tiring to sing, your sound is breathy, it's pressed, it is too dark, swallowed, it is too bright. We could go on for days, right? Anything you run into, vowels, consonants, all of it, anything you run into at the end of the day, it's just going to have to do with something that's going on with the tube or the air in the tube or both of those things. Okay, so that's the tube. Keep that in your brain. Moving on to the tongue. Now, the tongue is important because it's inside your tube. And it's much bigger than what we are aware of on a base level. This beauty shot is a perfect example of what we're most aware of. You go to the doctor, you say, ah, right? You look in the mirror, you stick your tongue way out. At most, you can see about a third of it. And that's if you're really talented. right? Like your tongue is humongous. It is, as some pedagogy person said once in a book that I read, the big movable plug inside your tube. If we look at it, that beauty shot we just saw, the blade of the tongue, there's the tip of the tongue. We have dissected this gentleman so that we can see inside his oral cavity. The part that we see in our mouth, it's just this top part. There's the tip of your tongue, and we might see maybe back to there. Like I said, if you can like really go with it, you might get back there. But even that, we're only talking about a quarter to a third of your tongue that you can actually see. The whole tongue encompasses this entire bit of tissue that you can see on this screen. And it's a big conglomeration of muscles that work in tandem with each other. Not only is it big, but it moves, and it is very movable. And when we move the front, the back also moves. And as singers, we're super aware of what we're doing with the front of our tongue because we can feel it and we can see it, but we also have to be aware that anything we do in the front is also going to change the back. And that's important because the tongue is essentially one whole wall of your tube. If we're looking at this dissection, for instance, which is even more, violating of this poor soul than the one that we watched earlier, you can see even a bit more of it. So here's the tongue, there's the tip. It goes all the way back. Here's the tube that we're talking about. Ignore the colors back here. This was a diagram that typically shows parts of the pharynx, and I'm using it for other purposes. So ignore the blue and the green and the purple. But the tube that we're talking about is essentially here. So about there is where the vocal folds are going to be. So this is the trachea. This tube is going to go down to your lungs. The air is going to come up from the lungs. It's going to set the vocal folds in motion, which in turn is going to set the air particles in motion. And then that air is going to move through the singer's tube, which essentially goes here, up this way. This is the soft palate, which as singers, most of the time we're going to have that up, so it won't be hanging down like that. It'll actually be up here and closing off this nasal cavity. So this tube will be without that constriction right there, or that without something in the way. The air would move up this way going through the tube. Now, if you're looking at the tube, be aware. Here's the part of the tongue you can see. The entire front part of the tube is tongue, right? Which means every time this moves, the tube changes. Think about your brass instrument. If you take the tube of that brass instrument and you change the shape of it, or you change the size of it, it is going to sound different. Same thing with our tube. And it can be different either to our detriment or to the betterment of what we're trying to do, right? I'm sure you're all playing around with your tongue right now. I would be if I were you. I'd be moving it all around. If you're not doing that, move your tongue around so that you can kind of feel it moving. You can even take your fingers. If you notice right here on this diagram, you can see that the tongue, it's not only long and going all the way back down the back of the throat, but it's also quite thick and goes all the way down to the bottom of your chin. If you feel under your chin, you will feel that it's fleshy, and you can take your thumbs and just kind of press into the bottom of your mouth, and you feel this kind of fleshy stuff. That's muscle, right? Under the bottom side of your tongue. And if you move your tongue, like right now, for instance, I'm speaking to you, and as I'm speaking to you, I can feel my tongue moving in its muscular entirety underneath my chin, because not only am I articulating vowels and consonants to you right here, but the entirety of the muscle is moving all the way down, which means my tube is changing shape, which is causing the sounds that are coming out of my face, right? Why don't you just take a second and make different vowels? E, I, E, I. Now make the I vowel super dark. Go E, I. E, do you feel it? Go ah, and then aw. So you've got my fingers under there. Ah, aw, ah, aw. It's a little creepy, right? Whole point being, your tongue is massive, right? And anything you do with it is going to affect the tube because your tongue is well, it's occupying the entirety of that tube, right? And every time it moves, your tube changes shape. Every time your tube changes shape, what comes out of your face changes. Okay, so to make my point a little bit more clear and to watch a fun kind of weird video, we're going to watch this dude beatboxing with the help of an MRI. So we get to actually see inside of him. He's going to speak a little bit at the beginning, and I'll let you kind of see what's happening while he's speaking so that you can see the tongue. So here's the tongue. There's his lips right there. Here's the tongue. This is the tube, right? And we're going to trace it all the way around the tongue. And remember, his tongue is going to go all the way down to there. He can feel his tongue right there as well. So this is the tube. The air is going to come up this way. So vocal folds are about right here. They're going to set that air in motion. And the air is going to travel all the way up this way. And as he moves his tube, or as he moves his tongue around, that tube is going to change shape, which is going to change the sound he gets. Another thing that you might pay attention to, just so you know what's up, this is the soft palate. Right now in this still, he's got it closed, which means it's closing off the nasal passage. Depending on what he's doing, as you kind of are watching this, you'll see it drop down, meaning he's letting air pass up into the nasal cavity, just so that you know what's going on. So we'll watch him speak for a little bit, just so that you can see it. And then I'll kind of click it forward so you can see some of the actual beatboxing. But essentially what I want you to pay attention to is this tube and just how versatile the tube is of your instrument based on what you do with this tongue, which has infinite number of movements that can happen.
Hello, my name is Timo Schnepp and I'm going to perform a beatbox freestyle inside a real-time MRI. Here we go.
Okay, you get the point. You can go look that up and, geek out on your own time. But you get my point. So moving on with this. So that is the tube, right? We're clear on the tube. We're clear on the tongue and the fact that it's living inside the tube, and every movement that tongue makes is changing that tube, which means we're getting a different sound out here. Concept/thing number 3, the tall neck. Now, the tall neck is one of the fastest ways I can access freedom in my singer's tube when they walk into my choir rehearsal for the first time. I would also say it's the fastest way. Well, it is. It's definitely the fastest and almost always, without fail, the first thing I do with my singers when they walk into my applied studio. And this goes for all singers, whether I'm talking about an incoming freshman or an incoming graduate student or professional singer. I'm going to start here, especially if I see it and realize that it's a thing. And it's almost always a thing. So my ensemble that I conduct at ECU is almost entirely freshmen. About 2/3, a half to 2/3 of them are non-majors. So this is an ensemble that isn't consistently trained. I would say the very opposite of consistently trained. They're just kids that love to sing. And then there's a handful of voice majors in there, all of whom are 18, 19 years old tops, right? So they walk into my rehearsal, and when I have them sing a sound for the first time together at, very first rehearsal in the fall, it is not an innately gorgeous sound to start with. It's mediocre, it's fine. But it's often quite diffuse, pretty, but there's no what I would call core in it or overtones in it, or there's no color in it. It's usually what I would just call a very kind of white noise sort of sound. It's a noisy sound, right? Without fail, this changes that sound. I will talk about the idea of tall neck with my singers, which is essentially an alignment idea, right? So if you take your fingers and you find your spine, right, at the top of your back. So I've got my fingers, I know you can't see my hands behind my head, but I've got my fingers about right here, and I'm kind of feeling my spine up the back of my neck until I get right here, which is a joint. And if you feel at the bottom of your skull, it feels like a little divot. It's called the AO joint, which is an acronym, but it's also called the head neck joint, or at least that's what you'll see in like Alexander Technique books and stuff. They use this joint a lot for very good reason, or they reference this joint a lot. So if you walk up and you find that little divot, that's where your spine meets your skull. And if you do a little wiggle, most of the time I have my students find it and I have them bobble just a little bit. Pretend you are one of those little fancy bobblehead things that lives on the dash of the car, right? So wiggle, wiggle, and as you're wiggling from that joint, you bring your head back over your body. And what happens is your neck in the back becomes tall, right? And if you're over your body and that neck is tall and that joint is released, your chin is actually probably down a little bit. Most of the time we think our chin has to be parallel with the floor, but if you feel what happens to the back of your neck back there, if you bring your chin parallel to the floor, it gets shorter. And we want taller. And the reason we want taller is because the minute your head comes over your body and you get tall neck, length back there, immediately the muscles in your throat, which coincidentally are also the muscles that make up the walls of your tube, release. We tend to live here in some capacity, right? When we're out here, the weight of your head is in the hands, so to speak, of the muscles in your throat. So the muscles in your throat are engaged when they're out here to support the weight of your head. The minute you move your head back, a lot of the muscles in your throat release, including the ones that are in the surrounding walls of your tube, right? So the minute you bring this head back, all those muscles release. And when a muscle releases, you lose bulk, right? Think about your bicep. If you constrict, it bulks up, right? If you release, it gets smaller. Same thing up in here. We lose that bulk, and all of a sudden, not only is the tube more in line, but all of a sudden the walls of the tube have released and open. Here's what happens to the sound. If I start here and move my head, you'll hear it change. Right? Now, the sound doesn't change because I get more talented when I'm here versus when I'm here. The sound doesn't change because my voice gets better from here to here. The sound changes because my tube is more open here versus here. And this is one of the first ways you can take responsibility for keeping your tube open. And if the tube stays open, then the air is moving through the tube, right? What's your job as a singer? Keep the air going through the tube. When you're finding tall neck, make sure that you keep that kind of bobblehead sensation over your body, right? Don't hold. I will very often use the words live. Let your head live over your body, not put your head over your body. The minute you put it, then all these muscles, again, are going to engage. What happens? They bulk up. What happens to your throat? You lose space, right? That's not the goal. So live over your head, nice and loose, right? Monitor it. Like monitor for yourself throughout rehearsals. Monitor throughout your practice sessions. Monitor in your... I'm notorious for this with myself. I'm looking for a binder, and of course, I can't get my hands on one. I'm notorious for having music in front of me and coming over it. And the minute I come over my music, immediately I've compromised my tube, which means that I have compromised the ease of the sound, and I'm making it harder to keep the air going through the tube. And I guarantee you the quality of the sound coming out of my face has changed. So start there and monitor yourself. And while you're monitoring, also monitor to make sure that's released back there and not held. Okay, so the three concepts: the tube we talked about, the tongue, which is in the tube, and the tall neck, which is one of the very first ways you can take charge of your tube, right? Just these three things connect into one another. And the more you learn about them, we're going to build on them over these next couple of videos. The more you learn about these concepts, the closer you're going to get to finding your real resonance. And that's a concept we're going to talk about a little bit more in a later video as well. But real resonance is maybe something that you, and I might be wrong, you may be in the right ballpark, but it may be different than what comes to mind immediately when you think of the word resonance. Real resonance, which we're going to talk about in a later video, that's what brings you to freedom, easy production, beauty in your sound, a balanced tone, intonation, control over your instrument, and flexibility. The ability to walk into your voice lesson and sing Brahms or your Puccini aria with the same voice and the same ease that you walk into your choral rehearsal and sing a motet. Both of which, well, all three of which, I've pointed out three things, right? All three of which require you to produce a different kind of sound. But if that sound is coming from a place of real resonance, and you're making that sound by being aware of keeping the air moving through the tube, then you get to a place where the way you're making the sound is way more important than worrying about what's coming out of your face. That's the afterthought. Okay, so we've got a couple of videos left to go, so hang in there with me. And like I said, try not to get too bogged down in the science. I promise I'm only going to tell you as much as I absolutely have to make these kind of base ideas make sense to you.